Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. If I were to ask you, how's your well-being, how would you answer? What exactly is well-being, and how can we cultivate it in ourselves and in our families? Wellbeing is something we probably hear every day, whether we're on socials or maybe in a workplace or talking with a friend. And today we're really going to unpack it so you have a good understanding of what it is, what it means, and how you can get more of it. And it's not something we buy on the shelf, as you'll soon learn. I'm sure you knew that already. Today's episode is going to answer the questions I've already posed and share so much really helpful and important information that we all need. We're joined today by the wonderful Dr. Suzy Green. Suzy is a clinical and coaching psychologist, a member of the Australian Psychological Society, and she is the founder and CEO of the Positivity Institute. She is on a mission to reduce the impact of mental illness in our workplaces, in our communities, as well as our schools. And she's joining us today from Sydney in New South Wales. So welcome, Suzy.
Oh, very pleased to be here, Jodi.
Thank you for joining us. I know that you have a very busy schedule because you're doing such important work. So I'm really grateful for you being able to spend an hour of your time here with me today. You and your incredible team at the Positivity Institute are on a mission to reduce the impact of mental illness, to help people to flourish, and to really help people put the skills and strategies that come from positive psychology into practice. Positive psychology is, of course, at the heart of the work that you do. And so I'd really love for you to start by telling us about positive psychology and how it differs from traditional psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting from my perspective, coming from a clinical psychology background. So I'm still registered clinical psychologist, but I moved into the field around 2001, and the field of positive psychology officially launched only in 1998 in the US. So I often say I've sort of grown up with the field and have seen its evolution and development. For me at the time, I have to, I guess, reiterate with clinical psych, was very, very deficit focused, quite symptom focused, reduction of symptoms. And for me, as I started to learn about some of the early research that was going on in positive psychology particularly around the cultivation of positive emotions, that was quite energizing for me. And I think, working at the time, I was working part-time in a psychiatric clinic and really seeing people that were very, very unwell. And I also could see the benefit in being more proactive, which is what the aim of positive psychology primarily is, to be proactive mental health promotion, mental health prevention. And I also had young children at school at the time, and I realized, I'm learning these skills as a psychologist in training, and why aren't my children learning some of these, what I would argue and still argue are basic psychological skills that we all need? But to just put it very briefly, there are many different definitions for the field of positive psychology. My favorite one is the science of the conditions and processes of optimal human functioning. So really, very simply, it's a study of us at our best, and it sits on the shoulders of humanistic psychology, which was quite large in the 50s and 60s. And then when a lot of the cognitive behavioral, rational emotive behavior therapy came through, it was sort of, it sort of sidelined a little bit, and it wasn't really brought back until Professor Martin Seligman launched it in his presidential speech as the president of the American Psychological Association in 1998, and said the time has come for psychology to focus on what's right with people and what's right with the world rather than what's wrong with it. So I can talk a bit more to that today, but for me, clinical psych historically particularly clinical psychology, has been around the reduction or particularly the treatment of psychiatric psychological disorders. But I have to say, Jodi, I've just come back from the Australian Psych Society Clinical Psychology college conference in South Australia only about 6 weeks ago. And I was absolutely delighted to see a move towards a much more holistic approach to the, I guess, identification and treatment of mental illness. So it seems like things are changing, but I think, there's a lot that positive psychology can bring, even to fields like clinical psychology or psychology more broadly.
I really appreciate you sharing that detailed explanation with us, and I know that that's probably just scraping the surface for you in terms of your what you could have shared with us. But I think for us to know that once upon a time, really the idea of sort of mental health in quotation marks was about not being depressed or being less depressed, and it makes sense, doesn't it, when we look at it from when we say that out loud now, that, well, hey, that's not mental health, that's not well-being, that's not flourishing, that's just improvement. But yeah, we can there's so much more potential for all of us. And I'm really interested that you were saying about the conference, and that there's a more holistic approach to well-being and to mental health. Can you please tell us a bit more about that approach and what factors are being considered so that it's more than perhaps has been considered in the past?
Yeah, look, I think there's a whole lot I could say on that. And to be honest, I'm still processing a lot of the information that I received at that conference. The overwhelming takeaway for me was the increased recognition of just how much trauma people are suffering in the community. And I was also really interested to hear, and I was aware of this research, but it was interesting to hear other psychologists quoting it around the intergenerational transmission and genetic expression or inheritability. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will manifest, because the environment plays a big role in terms of whether those genes are expressed or not. And that all gets a little bit technical, I think. Yeah. But I think for me, there was a great recognition of how compassionate we need to be for our clients, for ourselves as practitioners. In fact, they asked one of the workshop leads asked the participants to complete a questionnaire around their own experience of adverse early childhood experiences, and it was over 60% of people in the room. So I think, just a recognition of trauma, and some of the other thinking is that for many of those identified psychiatric disorders in the DSM-5, that underpinning a number of them are trauma experiences. So for me, that was interesting, in as much as, rather than classifying and categorizing disorders, which I absolutely understand the reasons for us doing that in terms of particularly communicating as professionals and for legal and medical requirements. But I think really starting to understand that some of these disorders have a function, or are a function of what's happened in somebody's life or biology. And I also think, with the greater increased interest in interventions from Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Act, which is much more, I guess, values-based, compassion-based, I could definitely feel a shift coming through from when I sort of last attended, which was, as I said, quite a while ago, a clinical psych conference. So I left there quietly inspired by that.
Oh, I love that. It's like turning an ocean liner, isn't it, when it comes to really significant change. And I'm ACT trained, and am incredibly passionate about it. It's made like a very powerful difference in my own life, and it was just the recognition of even just one of my values when I had postnatal depression with our firstborn, that motivated me with the realization, this is what I really value, this is very important. I'm not living in alignment with this at all, and that was about my health, and I stopped exercising, which was one of the worst things I could have done, but I felt so consumed by parenthood. And with that recognition and the realization, I moved through the discomfort of having to hand my little infant over to a relative stranger at the creche, at the gym, and I went back to the gym, and that was the first step in turning my mental health and my life around, really. And so I experienced, I suppose, the real power of that. And that's just one tiny little drop in the ocean. But yeah, right. Isn't it the best when you have professional learning opportunities and you walk away feeling like, oh gosh, we're all moving in a really important exciting direction, I suppose. Yes. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'd like to say there is I was very fortunate because I moved into coaching psychology, which was really only launched in the year 2000. So if you think about positive psychology formally launching 1998 in the US and coaching psychology as a separate field launching here in Australia in the year 2000, they've both grown up together. And I've really had a foot in each camp. And I've published quite a lot on the integration of those two fields. But within coaching and the coaching methodology that I was introduced to through Professor Anthony Grant, who was the director and the founder of the unit, the late Professor Anthony Grant, I was introduced very early on. So it was part of my doctorate when I was doing my research on coaching as a mental health prevention intervention. We always started off with a values exercise. And at that point, I thought, wow, I've never talked about values in my clinical psych training, you know, and then ACT came along. And I think, you know, I'm sure I was one of the first psychologists. There was a first training in ACT, maybe it was 2004 or 5, something like that. Yes. And I looked to my colleague who's a coaching and counselling psychologist, and we both nodded and went, yeah, we've been using this for the last few years in coaching, and how wonderful that there are now treatment approaches that also recognise values. So values has been inherent in coaching psychology from when it launched. It hasn't necessarily been in strictly speaking in positive psychology. I think that's an area that positive psychology hasn't really embraced enough. It's been very strengths based. Yes. And a lot of research on strengths, but light on the values. So I think ACT brings a really robust approach and significant increasing research around the value of values.
Yes, it's a line of questioning that I could take us down, but I won't today because there's other things I really want to talk to you about. But I think what would be really important for me to do is maybe really dedicate a whole episode to that, because it's something that's been talked about and explained and mentioned and suggested, and strategies around it sort of in drops here and there throughout episodes. But I think it would be a worthwhile thing for me to do. It's really exciting, and it's this idea, isn't it, that that life is so challenging for so many people. I know you're in Sydney, I'm in Melbourne, and you know what? I've got a 14 and a 16-year-old, and my daughter said last night, because I'm reading a book called Good with Money, and because don't we all want to be good with money? This is
Well, absolutely, Jodi. And I think it's the Australian Psych Society have done a number of surveys over the years, and every single year financial stress is the number one stressor for Australians, yet it's not often recognised or discussed in our profession. So I think I'm so pleased to hear that you're doing that.
I am really working to educate myself and feel more knowledgeable so that Peter, my husband, and I can support our kids, and so these have been sort of conversations in the home. But my daughter knows I'm reading the book, and then last night we were, she's 14 and we still snuggle in bed before she goes to sleep, which is just adorable. I love it. But she said, no, we got talking about something, and she said she'd really love to have her own place one day and live the dream of living alone with all her plants and her pets. And she said, but I'm really stressed about buying a house. And I thought, oh goodness, this idea of this financial stress around housing crisis and difficulty with rentals and financial stress is filtering down. And she's 14 and I'm not talking to her about it. So it's a lot of people are experiencing that. As you just said, it is the number one stressor for Australians, and in conjunction with that, there are a lot of people who are struggling with mental health, whether it's themselves or their children, and just times seem to be particularly tough, don't they, for a lot of people. And some of the terms that I know I've used a lot and that are really integral to the work you do terms like well-being, which we've already sort of mentioned, flourishing, mental health, and what I'd really appreciate is if you could take a little bit of time, because we can strengthen our mental health and we can cultivate well-being and we can flourish more than we perhaps are. There are things that we can do, but I think it's probably really worthwhile to get a bit of an understanding first about what are each of those terms. Are they interchangeable? How are they related? And I know that I've just thrown a number of questions at you at once, but start where you can and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, you're so right, though, that the terms are used interchangeably, and even in the scientific literature, that's been the case. And I think there's recognition that that is an issue, particularly, I guess, from a research perspective. But if I just I'll start with mental health because it's one of those terms that I still, I'm attuned to in the community, because even today or even in the last week, I've heard people in the media and quite, whether it's politicians or police, referring to people with mental health, not even adding the terms issues, but just like it was an issue. It was a mental, no, not even issue. It was just like it was due to mental health. Yes. Well, I think what they were trying to say, it was due to mental ill health. So, and when I was doing my doctorate many years ago, there used to be an institute for mental health at the university that I attended, and I always used to have a bit of it, giggle in some ways about it, because they weren't really studying mental or positive mental health, if you like. They were studying mental ill health. Yes. So I think for me, mental health is the broad conception of the full range, whether it's people that are struggling, but right through to the positive range of people that what we would call are flourishing or thriving. But if we sort of park that, I think that's a really important thing for people to consider, though, because I guess you can say mental health issues. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is a difference between, as you know, mental ill health and what we might call positive mental health, which is the positive expression of broader mental health, like physical health.
Yes.
But in the wellbeing science, and as I think you picked up earlier in our conversation today, the absence of mental ill health does not equate to the presence of positive mental health or well-being, and the World Health Organization recognized that many years ago. And similarly, I used to use the DASS quite a lot in my clinical work, the depression, anxiety and stress scale. And, really our job was over when people were scoring in the normal range of depression, anxiety and stress, rather than saying, well, what measure is there of positive mental health, and why don't we continue to work with people until they really are in more of the flourishing or thriving state? So that's something that positive psychology has really highlighted. Even before positive psychology launched, Professor Ed Diener, I think, had done something like 30 years of research on a psychological construct called subjective well-being. And subjective well-being utilizes two psychometric measures. One is satisfaction with life. So people basically answer, I think it's 5 or 6 questions. How satisfied am I with my life right now? And the other psychometric that works with that is called the PANAS, which stands for positive affect, negative affect. So very simply speaking, how many positive emotions am I experiencing versus how many negative, if we want to use those labels, which I'm not a big fan of, but just for the purposes of, how much, anger or fear or sadness versus how much joy, elation, gratitude. If you view that as an emotion, it can also be a cognition. If I'm getting really technical here.
I love it.
But so subjective well-being, when I first came into the field, if you searched for research on happiness in positive psychology, and sometimes the research articles would actually say, a study on happiness, when you looked at the psychometrics as to how they measured that, it would have been subjective well-being. So we do have a lot of research, and that's often referred to as hedonic. They call that hedonic well-being. So it's more about the feeling good, that more of the emotional state and the cognitive understanding of whether I'm feeling good. There's also what we call psychological well-being, which we often refer to as eudaimonic well-being, which is more about a broader conception. So, am I living in accordance with my authentic self, which is a daemon, I believe Aristotle spoke about. And so, topics like do I have positive relationships with others? Have I a sense of personal growth? So there's a whole range of meaning and purpose in life. So there's about 6 different ways that we can measure psychological well-being. So I guess it's a bit of a complicated response. What I'm saying is that various theories, and there are various models, and even models existing that haven't had psychometric assessment or, being put through rigorous assessment. And you'll often see people that make their own well-being measures, which are more holistic, that go beyond psychological. So they might include financial, that we picked up before, or physical health. So it's still I guess a field in development. And what I'm certainly seeing is within psychology, as I said, we've been very focused on the psychological aspect, but we can talk about well-being more holistic and look at other spiritual well-being, as I said, financial well-being. So I hope that it's still a bit messy, but I hope that gives some clarification, that you can focus either in on the psychological, or you can look more broadly at well-being.
Yes, thank you. And in my mind, and I think it's probably helpful for me to sort of share what I've taken from this, is that mental health we can look at on a continuum. That's often at one end, down the end we don't want to hang out, but some of us do on occasion, more than people might realise, is the languishing end. The other end is flourishing, and that flourishing and well-being can be used sort of more interchangeably. Is that a reasonable
Yes,
conclusion?
I would say so. And also we're increasingly seeing the use of the term thriving, which is often being used interchangeably, particularly in workplace context. Now, in saying that, Jodi, there's also some wonderful work that's been done by Professor Corey Keyes, who actually coined that whole term within the mental health field around languishing and flourishing. And Corey talks about, and he's just published a book called, I think it's called, or was it called Flourish? I think it's just called Flourish. It's only just come out. And he talks about how you can actually, and this is often hard to wrap our heads around, you can be struggling with mental ill health, but that doesn't mean that you can't have moments or periods of flourishing. And I remember when my supervisor tried to explain this to me like 20 years ago, and I couldn't really fully understand it. And he explained to me, particularly with disorders such as, say, schizophrenia, that he was actually working with people that had a chronic schizophrenia, and they were still, reporting times of flourishing in their lives. So it's not that black and white, and it's not that static either. So we might move in and out of these states of what we call flourishing, coasting, high levels of burnout, probably too engaged, and then mental ill health. So we can move around these areas. It's not always that static.
It's clearly very complex, and I do appreciate you helping us to peel back some of those layers, because I guess at the end of the day, when I think about what's important for all of us is to understand ourselves in terms of sort of where we're at and what we can do to bring more of those moments of flourishing into our lives, or to experience more positive emotions, be that joy or contentment or gratitude or elation, but also to understand, and this is something that I share when I speak to senior students as part of my work. And one of the things I'll say is that really good mental health is about having the appropriate emotion for the situation and being able to express it, being able to recognise it and express it. And so if something does go wrong, then it's appropriate, of course, to feel sadness or rejection or embarrassment or fear or whatever it is that's happening. Like that, this idea that all emotions are really important, and there's the ones that we like and the ones that we don't, and use the terms earlier, positive and negative affect, and some will use the words good and bad. And we know that with a rich life, and this is obviously my ACT language coming through, that what I really want all of us here on the podcast to know is that it's okay to experience a range of emotions. Mental health, well-being, flourishing, thriving, however we want to sort of look at it, does not mean feeling good all the time. What would you say to that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I think coming from a clinical psych background, that's been my understanding from the beginning. And there have been many critiques of positive psychology where there are assumptions, or have been assumptions made, that that's what positive psychology is suggesting. And clearly there has been a focus on the cultivation of positive emotions based on some pretty rigorous theory underpinning that and research. But yeah, absolutely, all of those emotions are normal and useful. It's really when they go to their clinical extremes, as you and I know, that they become problematic.
Yes. Oh, and you've just referenced positive emotions, which are so important and are an important part of positive psychology. Can you tell us more about positive emotions? And whilst, yes, mental health is not about feeling positive all the time, what can we do to cultivate and savour and enjoy more positive emotion in our life? Because that's kind of what we're all looking for, really, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, whilst positive psychology has been acknowledged as the field that has brought the attention and the research onto positive emotions, because I don't know about you, Jodi, but I never once had a lecture on joy or love when I was studying clinical psychology. So it's only really been through the science that falls under the umbrella of positive psychology that we now have a better understanding of positive emotions. A lot of that work was done by Professor Barbara Fredrickson, and there were some earlier researchers prior to Barb's work, Dr. Alice Eisen, who did some work too. So we know that through Barb's work, she's identified 10 different positive emotions in her lab, whereas, often people have very restricted vocabularies, not just about positive emotions, but as you know, about all emotions. We have fairly restricted vocabularies, and that's why it's so important that children at school are learning wellbeing literacy and emotional literacy, for example. So we know that we can consciously cultivate these emotions. So I can list them off for you if you like. I haven't quite memorized them, but I just brought up the full list in front of me. I mentioned gratitude. Gratitude's an interesting one because it's also a cognition. We can cultivate a grateful mindset, as you would know, but it's also been identified as an associated emotion that we can feel a sense of gratitude. Hope. I actually did my doctoral research was based on hope theory. So hope is also an emotion, but it's also a cognition. So if we cultivate hopeful thinking, then we can experience a sense of hopefulness emotionally. Joy, which who doesn't want a little bit of joy in their life? And for those of you that have watched Inside Out, who doesn't want to be Joy? She had the most amount of fun. Love's a positive emotion. Amusement. Just those amusing little moments, whether that's, scrolling through Insta and there's a funny reel. I sent one to my son who's in London last week of, some of the funny sayings that Aussies have that I thought he'd appreciate. And that brought a little bit of amusement to my day. Confidence, again, it can be cognition, but it can also be an emotion. Interest, having that sense of curiosity, and which I often end up down rabbit holes and experiencing those emotions of interest. Pride, having a sense of pride in our lives or in our work. Inspiration, feeling completely inspired. I was inspired by one of the keynote presenters at the recent conference I attended. And serenity, and most of us will remember the wonderful film The Castle, Serenity Now, Serenity.
Feel the serenity.
I think Feel the Serenity. That was it, wasn't it?
Yes.
Feel the Serenity. And I was actually went to a wonderful retreat in Vancouver, just off Vancouver Island, last year I think it was, and we went out in a little boat looking for bears through binoculars. It wasn't quite peak bear season, but it was as quiet, like you couldn't hear a single noise except for waterfalls, the ripple of the water. And I sat there, Jodi, and I thought to myself, how long is it since I have felt a sense of serenity like this? And I honestly could not tell you. So the idea is that firstly, we understand that there are different types of positive emotions, and then we can actually create, Barb Fredrickson calls it a positivity portfolio. So you might decide, and this is a great exercise for school kids as well, you might want to decide for the next month, I'm going to focus in on inspiration, or the next quarter, for example. You can do this in workplaces with teams, but again, it's about raising our awareness of these emotions and then thinking about how do they already exist in my life, and are there ways that I can be more intentional about creating these positive emotions in my life.
Oh goodness, and that's something every single person can do, and even in a family. And gosh, my kids love me. I'm sure your kids love you and all the things you brought to them from what you're learning and studying. And, they love it, don't they? Yes, I've listeners will know, regular listeners to the podcast will know I have a blackboard in our family room, and at the moment it says, live a life of risk or risk a life unlived. And
love it.
Yeah, it's so good. And I wish I could attribute that to an author. I don't know who said that, and I've looked. So please, if you find out, let me know, people. And it's so interesting because that's not something I write on it, and I don't draw anyone's attention to it. I used to be very didactic with it. Oh, I've written this means that. Now I just pop something on it and just let it kind of, percolate in the minds of my family members. And my daughter, just as an aside note, we were in the water at Manly in the big waves, and I remember her saying, I remember thinking, gee, I'm really glad all those swimming lessons have paid off. All of those, oh my goodness, all of those trips to the pool and the sticky clothing coming back on over sort of semi-dry bodies and all of that has really paid off, because she was really confident in the surf. And I said as much. I said, hey, I love being out here with you, diving under them or jumping over them or bodyboarding. And she said, well, Mum, I used to be a bit scared of what was in the water. But she said, I feel as though if you don't, and she kind of paraphrased this thing that was on the blackboard. She said, I feel as though if you don't kind of challenge yourself to kind of do things that are hard, then, you just never get to do new things. And it kind of clocked with me. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's actually internalizing this message.
Absolutely.
And putting it into practice. So I was like, yes, total win.
I love that.
But,
I mean, there is, as you know, quite a bit of research about the power of priming. And so I think, well done to you, Jodi. And we know that life is going to throw us challenges. But most, I won't say about most, but a large amount of people don't proactively challenge themselves. They wait for the life challenges to come. They're not necessarily waiting in anticipation, but those life challenges will come. And then we develop, our character through those life circumstances. But the question would be, why wait? Like, why not challenge ourselves and build our sense of confidence and capability to take on challenges when they come? And I'm so pleased that your children or adolescent's daughter is learning that at that age. How wonderful.
It's really important for all of us. And there are a lot of, it will be adults that are listening who it's hard to, there's discomfort. There is discomfort. There's fear. I'll just, before I came into the studio, one of my beautiful colleagues here at Positive Media she was dipping salt and vinegar potato chips in French onion dip. Have you seen that before?
No, I don't think so.
And I looked and thought, that is new. I've never seen that. And then she offered me one, and I'm like, yes, I am putting myself out of my comfort zone here. And I tried one. I'm like, I'll just have another chip, please. No dip for me on the second round. But there are, when we challenge ourselves, it doesn't have to be something like skydiving, does it? We can do
Exactly.
small things like something and chips and French onion dip, and once you've tried it, you'll know yes or no. I'm a no.
Absolutely. You're so right there.
But with the positive emotions, I really appreciate that you've been able to list those for us. And for listeners who are, a lot of people who listen write to me and they're struggling with stress and anxiety. And of course, that's why I started the podcast. And so for somebody who's feeling sort of quite weighed down by life's challenges, whatever they might be, how could a person sort of going about their day, whether they're a parent or they work or both, just an individual on their own, look to cultivate more positive emotions in an average day?
For someone that might be feeling like struggling at the time? Or?
Yeah, so if someone's listening and thinking, oh, goodness, I'm feeling overwhelmed with life's challenges for various reasons and not experiencing a lot of positive emotion or very focused on the stress and the overwhelm and the anxiety that they might be experiencing, how could a person who's sort of struggling, I suppose, cultivate a little bit more joy in their life or look for or find or create more positive moments?
Yeah, again, there's so much I could say and probably so much that the field of positive psychology could add there. I think first and foremost, even as you'd know, when we think about stress, there can be good stress, which is known as eustress, EUSTRESS, or chronic stress or, unhealthy stress. So I think firstly, recognizing, and this is, I guess, a large part of mindset, which traditionally is broader psychology, but, how am I looking at that stress? Is it short term? Is it likely to be longer term? Does that mean that this is the time to reassess my life? And so a large part of the research in positive psychology has to do with our meaning and a sense of meaning in our lives and purpose. So sometimes those times when we're feeling a little overwhelmed, taking some time out. I mean, there's quite a lot of research in pos psych, but psychology more generally coming out of eco-psychology and nature-based approaches. So we often recommend taking time off or retreat in nature to, reflect on what might be the stressors that are causing me that. And then that they might be factors that can't be changed immediately. That's just the reality of the period that person's in, and hopefully it's only short term. But there's no reason then why you couldn't think, well, what's currently in my life that does bring me a little bit of joy? Because I'm assuming hopefully it's not all, it's not all no joy, if you like. And I can speak to that because having worked clinically for many, many years, even people I worked with that were very unwell or depressed, when you really ask them about their day, they could still find, it might have just been a cup of tea on the step, sitting on the step in the sunlight, or a brief phone call to a friend. It's really just trying to reorientate, which is sometimes challenging, as we know, with disorders like depression, to identify, what is working well. That's one of our key phrases in positive psychology, WWW, rather than all the things that aren't going well. Let's look at, even if they're just moments of joy, and then how can I possibly do more of those? And because of my coaching background, I would ask my clients, and I certainly do this for myself too, looking at my lifetime table and where in it, after I look at my commitments and responsibilities, what are the activities that I can do that I know are going to boost my mood? That could be quality time with family and friends. It might be a dance class, might be listening to a beautiful piece of music. So I think first and foremost, sometimes these struggles and times in our lives, they feel awful and challenging at the time, but they can also be a time. And I remember my supervisor said to us once, it's not necessarily a breakdown, it can be a breakthrough when you really start to reassess what's important. And that's where the values piece, Jodi, as you know, becomes so powerful, because if you start to think about what really matters and how well does my life reflect that now, and often it's the disconnect and people have major ahas when they start to explicitly and consciously think about their values, and then they look at their lives and they go, no wonder I'm feeling like this, because I'm not really living a values congruent life. And I've seen in my work with clients, which I'm sure you have, even tiny little changes, they don't have to be major changes. So if health, for example, most people value their health, and then if they're not really doing much at all, even if it's just like a 10-minute walk around the block after dinner, like something small, and it's often, as we know, building those habits, tiny habits, building a sense of competence will allow us to have the confidence to then keep going as well. So it's a bit of a journey, but I would say there's no reason why you can't start to activity schedule. And if we think about, cognitive behavioral therapy, which many people that might be listening have been through, even, decades ago in Beck's work, who created CBT, we had activity scheduling, activities of pleasure and activities of competence. So it's always been there, even in clinical psychology. So we're just really building on that and identifying a whole range of positivity practices. And I actually have 20 different positivity practices. I have a handout, Jodi, I'm happy to send through for anyone that wants to contact you for that.
Oh, I really appreciate that, because sometimes it's having those as prompts will be, okay, what one of the prompts could be, I'm not seeing it, of course, but one of the prompts could be what you've just said about just getting out and going for a walk, or playing with a pet, or going and revisiting something you loved as in childhood. And it is easy for us to focus on kind of what's not going well, and just flipping that script and that WWW is really powerful in that what is going well, because sometimes we can tend to catastrophize a little, that everything's sort of difficult. And if we can sort of take some time out to sit, have some time away from everything we're doing to reflect and answer that question, most of us will be able to come up with lots of things that are going well, but also what can I add in that will really lift me and boost me. And, I was just reading a book recently. It's been around for a while. It's called Jordan Harbinger, I think that's how you say his name. It was the 12 Rules for Life. And I think his 12th rule was, if you see a cat on the street, pat it. And I thought, how bizarre. And he started the chapter by really saying, look, you're rarely going to see a cat on the street that's going to let you pat it, let's face it. And there's not going to be one on a lead. But just this idea that look for those little moments in the day. And for me, it would be patting a dog. Like, I would get a real moment of joy out of stopping someone, and my son does it too, and it's to the amusement of everyone around us, that, excuse me, can I please pat your dog? And whilst that might seem, like not everyone wants to do that, but that is a moment of joy. And
absolutely, micro joys, they're sometimes referred to, or glimmers, and there's been some great research too on, I can't think of what the technical term is, but that's just those casual encounters or conversations we have with the barista, for example, can actually give us a greater boost to our well-being than perhaps having a conversation with someone closer in our network. So make the most of those brief little interactions you have in the community also.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It is. It's there for the taking, really, if we just are alert to it and aware of it and start to look. And the example that you shared before, the idea of sunshine on you, where I sit in my home. My brother's visiting from London, as you said earlier, that your son is in London, but my brother's visiting and he's staying with us, and we're at opposite ends of sort of like, I'm in the dining room, that's my office, and he's in the lounge, and I've got all the sun coming in on my back, so I'm quite hot. He's at the other end of the room where he's got an extra blanket thrown over his lap at the moment, because he's in front of a big bay window. And I was sitting there, and I was in a T-shirt this morning working, and just thinking, this is just lovely. The warmth, the sun, and it was just fleeting. And just a last quick question before we finish up.
Yes.
How can we... So I noticed that, and I did have a moment where I thought, oh, that's lovely, but then I just got back to work. How can we savour a little bit more?
Yeah. And that's actually the technical term, and there's a whole body of research around savouring as well, which there have been found to be individual differences. So some of us are just better at it than others, but it's a skill you can build, and it really is a mindfulness skill. And so for anyone that's already been involved in some form of mindfulness practice, it really is an attentional training skill that we build up, and the more we do it, the better we get at it. So it's the good old stop and smell the roses, but you actually have to, again, be intentional, and you have to take a moment, and I think in your own mind realize that this is all we have, is this moment to the next moment. And there are plenty of joys to be found, particularly in the places that we live here anyway, Jodi. And so if we can learn to savour them, we're going to benefit ourselves, and that then creates a positive emotional and social ripple effect to those around us. So it's actually not a selfish pursuit. It's in service of others, ultimately.
Oh, Suzy, honestly, I've challenged you today because I've asked questions where there's a mile deep of research that you could reference, and you've done such a beautiful job of giving us some really important ideas and knowledge and new learning as well, plus some great strategies and some great coaching questions for us to all reflect on as well. I'm so grateful for your time. Could you please let our listeners know how they can work with you or your team at the Positivity Institute, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The website's possibly the best spot. So the Positivity, it's a long one, the positivityinstitute.com.au. And yes, we do have a number of associates, and we do offer some wellbeing coaching also, but also feel free to connect in on Facebook and Instagram. Would love to meet lots of people that are committed to living their best lives.
Oh, brilliant. And I'll put all of those details in the show notes. Dr. Suzy Green, it has been a joy, and I'm going to really savour this. I'm grinning from ear to ear, and I feel really, really thankful for the time that you've been able to spend with us, and the insights and ideas that you've been able to share. It's been a joy, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Jodi. Thank you again for the wonderful work you're doing.
Oh, thanks, Suzy, and thank you, listeners, for joining. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Please connect with Dr. Suzy Green and the brilliant work that she's doing. And please share this episode with someone who you think might benefit from it. Thanks again for your time, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.